Hi everyone, welcome back to Nasidyanka, the channel where I talk about Bulgarian history, culture, faith, ethnicity, and lots of fun and rare facts. For those of you who follow me, you already know that I am just translating information that I find in the Bulgarian language. I make it available in the English language. If you guys are not familiar with this, feel free to watch my earlier episodes. If you're interested, subscribe. If you're not interested, that's completely okay. I respect you as you come. So this here is part 4 of episode 19. This is where I began to share an article by the writer, at least presents herself as under the name of Alия Ошо, and she has compiled a lot of information from different researchers into one. I just found it very a lot easier to translate and share. So the website I am including under the comments section. So this is the topic here is pre-Columbian medicine. In other words, again, episode 19 refers to the Bulgarians who came to the Americas way before Columbus. So here we're going to talk about pre-Columbus medicine or pre-Columbian medicine. So all of the North and South American tribes actually share a common culture, a common way of life, and common worshipped gods, rituals, which have an inseparable connection with the ancient Bulgarian folk customs and traditions. Now, as a side note, let's just remember, I had mentioned in the past, I'll fix my camera here, that Bulgarians had a monotheistic religion. However, because of their advancement, cultural advancement, other peoples tended to call them deities and gods because they looked up to them based on their knowledge and information. So let me show you a little picture here. This is of a device for bloodletting. Even though it has been presented in quite horrific ways in the Western culture, it was actually used in ancient times, and so this is a plate for bloodletting, which is characteristic of all these peoples, both as having been used by pagans in magical rituals, as well as means of treatment, like for medical reasons. Utensils for bloodletting were found in the ancient Olmec culture, but it turns out that they are also characteristic of the Bulgarian customs even to this day. In our country of Bulgaria, in addition to using special devices, bloodletting was also practiced using leeches and suction cups. Now, the suction cups, I have mostly heard about them from Asian cultures, but again, Bulgarians had settled in Asia as well as in Europe, as well as in other continents, the Americas included. As a side note, my own grandmother used to tell me about that use in the 1920s, 30s, 40s. In her time, basically, she was born in 1920. And my own grandmother, who was a medical practitioner, she used cupping, which now I have come to learn is a Chinese medical practice, and very useful and natural indeed. So coming back to this article that I have translated and trying to share with you guys, it says that among the Olmecs, jade artifacts were found. Those were special spoons for bloodletting. So now I'm going to show you another picture of the elongated skulls, which is pretty interesting and makes me curious. Okay, now that you guys saw the elongated skulls picture of this image, and cranial deformation basically, I'm just going to add here that this article informs us that they're also a part of the ancient medical practices or ritualistic practices that existed both on the territory of ancient America as well as Bulgaria. So not only artificial cranial deformation, but also cranial trepanation has been practiced in the Americas since ancient times, which proves the advanced level of practices of the ancient Bulgarians. So the image that you saw is of the Olmec figures with elongated jade and granite skulls dating from the year between 900 and 400 BC. In our country of Bulgaria, there are documented cases of trepanation and artificial deformation of the skull dating back to the deepest antiquity. So once again, many modern scientists tend to deny, but evidence is getting more and more spread as it kind of like beams to the eye for the simple observer. So how are these exactly medical procedures? They say that they actually have been used to treat a number of brain and neuropsychiatric diseases. The author of this article also suggests that once the intracerebral pressure has changed, it would have changed the brain capacity and its functioning as well. The video specifically states, or the video that's there's a video that I'm including here in the comments section, and I'm sharing this in addition to the article here for you guys. So it states that this practice has been found in ancient Egypt, as well as discovered in Paracas, Peru, and so forth and so forth and so forth. Originally, it was believed that these elongated skulls belonged to tiny people of genetic mutations. Some observing the obvious deformations around the two brain hemispheres, the eye caves being enlarged and the so-called Sagittarian shaft being missing due to the practice, have even concluded that those must have belonged to like UFOs or something like that, you see. So people come up with all sorts of theories. It's also believed that these elongated craniums are at least 3,000 years old. But here is something else. The most recent DNA tests showed something a lot greater and remarkable than all of those made-up theories. In spite of some believers that these must belong to UFOs and aliens that had special abilities to control humankind, it turns out that if we pay attention to a little more factual information and historical evidence, we will see something completely different. Basically, a middle-aged Bulgarian village of blonde and blue-eyed inhabitants, among them standing out women of dark hair and dark eyes with elongated craniums, have been found, and it appears that this practice was making them indeed quite noticeable, especially in the old times. So they stood out. Also, a recent DNA study, like I mentioned, offers the hypothesis that those women that were found in our lands, whose elongated craniums were discovered in Central Europe, were brides of a high status and of arranged marriages coming from today's Romania and Bulgaria lands. So here I'm going to share with you guys a little bit about what Pavel Serafimov says about the practice of cranial elongation by the ancient Thracian Bulgarians. Once again, I'm including his website in my comment section. Please refer to his website. That's the original. I'm just translating here and sharing. So he shares that the artificial cranial deformation actually existed among the Thracians, who are the ancestors of our lands, Bulgarians. In scientific disputes, the one who has the most and best reliable data wins. Sometimes a small piece of information can change our minds about a subject. It is, of course, important that the available information is interpreted correctly and that it does not go misused. So in the course of many discussions, Serafimov shares that he has often marveled at the methods of his opponents in an attempt to assign the old Bulgarians to the Turkic community, as often as that has been broadcasted throughout school books and internet, wrongly of course. Those opponents, he says, have pointed out that the Turkic-speaking Chuvash shave their heads and leave a goatee, just like our Bulgarian ancestors. So when Serafimov replied that this hairstyle was peculiar to the Thracians and their close relatives, the Pelasgian Thracian Bulgarians. He was first reprimanded that this was not true, and after presenting Plutarch's testimony to the fact that the Mysians, shaved their hair and they let a part grow freely. And again, the Mysians are another tribe or state. It's a country of the Thracians, another group of Thracians, again Bulgarians. Those opponents suddenly decided that the hairstyle called kika was not a mark of ethnicity at all. In other words, the opposition here between truth and, shall I say, deception and lies is pretty big and pretty huge. But, I really appreciate Pavel Serafimov's research, Ivan Trenev's digging in depth into, again, bringing out the facts about Bulgarian culture, which affects the whole of humanity, human culture. I myself directly express my disgust in human smallness of mind, and especially in places where that's being manipulated and lied about. So let's see what Pavel Serafimov further says about the practice of cranial elongation by the ancient Thracian Bulgarians. He says that the Abantes were the first to cut their hair in this manner, not under instruction from the Arabians, as some suppose, nor yet in emulation of the Mysians, but because they were warlike men and close fighters who had learned beyond all other men to force their way into close quarters with their enemies. The argument with another opponent, he says, went in the same way, unfortunately. Wanting to make the old Bulgarians Iranians, the opponent emphasized, Pavel Serafimov shares, that among the old Bulgarians, artificial cranial deformation occurs, and that for the Thracians, this is something completely unknown, a fact showing that Bulgarians and Thracians are completely different peoples, as if. Also, when Serafimov went ahead and pointed out that artificial cranial deformation was known in Thrace from the Stone Age and was also found in all subsequent ages, suddenly the opponent turned like a flip-flop. I call them flip-flops, claiming that the strange custom was no longer relevant. It was practiced all over the world, you see. I say, Lord have mercy. So, yeah, that's right. Many peoples know artificial cranial deformation, but not many who can talk about a tradition of about 7,000 years, as it is with us, the Bulgarians. Globally, artificial cranial deformation is too common a phenomenon to be useful in establishing the ethnicity of the ancient Bulgarians. In other words, it has been minimized and it has been passed by. I'm going to show you here a portrait of an Egyptian noblewoman, daughter of Akhenaten. So you guys just saw a picture that, of this practice having been used even in Egypt, ancient Egypt, right? So coming back to Pavel Serafimov's further, story here, he says that if we look at this custom in a narrower plan, if we look at only one region like the Balkans, and that in a short time span, we will find something quite interesting. So in the period between the 1st and the 7th century, the Balkans were mostly inhabited by our Bulgarian ancestors, the Thracians, the Romans, and the Greek colonists. Thracians, and then Roman and Greek colonists. Thracians are the locals, right? Of course, the Roman legions are included, such as the Celts, Germans, Illyrians, and also people from North Africa. There are no literary records of the Greeks, Romans, Celts, Germans, and so forth and so forth and so forth, who inhabited Thrace in the specified period, however, to have practiced artificial cranial deformation. Up until recently, it was not known that this custom was indeed known in Thrace. Even today, it is difficult for many people to accept that even in the deepest antiquity, some of our Bulgarian ancestors practiced artificial cranial deformation, but Serafimov says this is a fact. In the year of 2003, Yordan Yordanov presented the following statement in his work, quoting, he said, in some of the necropolises of our lands dated various epochs, from the Neolithic period until the late Middle Ages, skulls with artificial deformation were found, end of quote. So this is the case regarding some of our necropolises dated in different eras, from the Neolithic to the late Middle Ages. Again, this comes from Serafimov's research and the website. You guys can click on the link that I am providing in the comments section for to be more precise with that information. Let's see further what he says. He says that 3 years earlier, Stefan Yordanov published a book rich in data in which artificial cranial deformation was also affected or concerned, addressed. Here are Yordanov's words, and this is a quote. He said, now it turned out that this practice also existed among some Thracian Pelasgian tribes settled in Asia Minor, and that the custom continued to function actively almost until the beginning of the Hellenistic era. And again, this is cited in Serafimov's article that I'm including into the comments section. So in fact, at least since the 80s of the 20th century, it has been known that artificial cranial deformation was well known to the Thracians. As the most striking examples is, the most striking example is often given to the Phrygian king Midas. Anyone who has read Herodotus also knows that the homeland of the Phrygians is the Balkans, where these Thracians were called Brygi or Phrygians. The Phrygians, as the Macedonians say, used to be called Brygians during the time that they were natives of Europe and dwelt with the Macedonians. But after they had moved or changed, moved into the Asian continent along with their country, or their people, they also changed their name and were called Phrygians. Here is a picture of the skull of the Phrygian king Midas. So you guys just saw the picture of the skull of the Phrygian Thracian king Midas, of his skull. So in Asia Minor, artificial cranial deformation has been practiced from time immemorial, but as this also applies to the Balkans, we have no reason to believe that the Phrygians and their neighboring Vitini and Mysians adopted the custom on their arrival in the new lands. In the Balkans, we cannot speak of masses because the practice was not typical for all Thracians, but it was only practiced used by certain groups of them. In other words, it is a regional feature. The custom of transmitting an elongated shape of the skull did not disappear with the arrival of the Romans in Thrace, but the authors who reported about it brought their own interpretation. Telling about life in Roman Thrace, Dmitry Nikolov mentioned that skeletons with deformed skulls were found in the city necropolis of the necropolises. It is not a one-off phenomenon, but rather a tradition, because Mr. Nikolov writes that these people left their heirs or heretical traces, so to speak. In other words, individuals with artificial cranial deformity were found even in later times. Nonetheless, our scientist believes that these are people of North Asian origin, Serafimov informs us, and that they are colonists who came from other lands. Sometimes science is literally speaking in the face of facts, things that I cannot comprehend. What about you guys? Coming back to Pavel Serafimov, he also adds that this scientist, Dmitry Nikolov, did not at all explain exactly what North Asian origin means and how it was established. It is judged by the name of the burials, whether the skull belongs to a Mongoloid DNA or whether it is because in the past the practice was thought to be typical of Asian peoples, but the individual ultimately buried in Thrace was also given an Asian origin somehow. So Pavel Serafimov here notes that personally he has no information about the presence of Mongoloids in the urban necropolises of Thrace from the Roman period of time. The interpretation of another scientist who established the practice of artificial cranial deformation in Thrace during the Roman rule is also unclear, he informs us. P. Trizzaroli reported several cases of artificial cranial deformation of female individuals in the necropolis of the Thracian city of Maronea. The Greek researcher believes that the people who practiced the strange custom lived in the 5th through the 6th centuries, and that they were Huns who were accepted into the local community. However, Trizzaroli, the same researcher, does not specify whether the skulls have Mongoloid markings or not. It is only said that the height of the individuals in question is a little taller than the other individuals of the female gender. So, yet the Huns were supposed to be short, weren't they? Here is a picture of that I wanted to share that comes again from those articles. So continuing with Nikolov and Trizzaroli, those researchers, and the question why would they exclude Thracians as practitioners of artificial cranial deformation continues to be a mystery, and a really frustrating, boggling mystery. Yurdan Yurdanov reports that the custom has been known in our Bulgarian lands since the Stone Age. Again, Pavel Serafimov informs us of this. The same author also provides information about the artificial cranial deformation of the Thracian princess from the burial mound near Vratsa. Vratsa is a city in nowadays Bulgaria. Here is a picture of the head of the Thracian princess from Vratsa, Bulgaria. So continuing here with Pavel Serafimov's information, he informs us that recently in the excavations of Heraclea Sintica carried out by Professor Vagalinsky, a skeleton was discovered, the skull of which was artificially deformed, dating back to the 4th century. This is another, but not the last, case of an artificially deformed skull from a burial, centuries older than the time of the Bulgarian prince Asparuh. It is true that until the early Middle Ages in our Bulgarian country, one cannot speak of masses, of the great masses, but there is a logical explanation for this. As was already mentioned, the custom was originally practiced not by the nobility and not by all Thracian tribes. It was regional. In some cases, as reported by Herodotus, the deceased noble Thracian was buried, and so there is no way to determine whether he had an artificial cranial deformity or not. Herodotus describes the manner of burial for the rich among them as follows. For 3 days they expose the corpse to view, and then they slay all kinds of victims and feast, having first made lamentation. Then they perform the burial rites, either consuming the body with fire, burning it, or covering it up in the earth without burning it. That comes from Herodotus, and again, this is cited in Pavel Serafimov's original works, for which I take no credit, right? I'm just translating for you guys, sharing here. So he says further that with the arrival of the Romans, part of the Thracian aristocracy was eliminated. Another small part took the side of the Romans, and this explains the relatively rare occurrence of the custom between the period from the 1st through the 7th century. In the lands of the northern Black Sea, our Bulgarian ancestors lived freely, so in that location the situation was completely different. After the 7th century, the status quo changed, however. The Romans were driven from our Bulgarian lands, and our ancestors who lived for more than half a millennium under Roman rule were now free. So it's quite natural that a period of revival of the old traditions would begin, and with it, the copying of, or the replication of, the mark of nobility, the artificial cranial deformation would carry on or be resumed. This tradition was lost only after our country, Bulgaria, again and again, was conquered by the Ottoman Empire. In just a century or two, the custom had almost disappeared. And of course, there were always isolated places where the old traditions were preserved, but there is no way to talk about the previous mass practices. Now we already know that artificial cranial deformation is not a new phenomenon in the Bulgarian or European lands. So it was not introduced until after the notorious year of 680, Bulgaria's formal formation of the country, as modern historians know or present it. But it concerns a custom whose roots must be sought in the Stone Age of the Balkans. And as I've mentioned in previous episodes, my previous videos, Bulgarians as a country existed, as a kingdom existed thousands of years before the popular 680. Whatever the manipulators of Bulgarian history do, the truth always does come out. No matter how much data is distorted and hidden, Bulgarians pretty much are everywhere. Our Bulgarian ancestors have given the Romans, the Greeks, the Celts, and so forth culture and religion. Our Bulgarian ancestors have ignited the spark of knowledge in Europe, as well as the other continents. As in this succession here, I have begun to talk about Bulgarians reaching the Americas, as there are some resources pointing to that. But also Asia, and I'll talk about it in the future, and also Egypt, and so forth and so forth. It is impossible to erase the people with whom history began. And this is pretty much what Pavel Serafimov focuses in this particular writing on the Bulgarians' influence on Europe. This is big enough as it is. No matter how bigoted the attempts to malign and steal our Bulgarian history or our human history, they will not succeed. Bulgarians have always been people of light, and light always wins, in the sense that it is truth. Truth shines out. You cannot walk in the darkness too long. So with this, I am going to stop here, and I'm going to let you guys ponder. I did incorporate, as you can see, several resources, starting with Alия Ошо's compilation of information, moving on to a video that I found, which is a documentary about the elongated cranial elongations, and finishing at the end with a translation of some of the things that Pavel Serafimov has found out. But as always, I really want to emphasize, I'm taking no credit for any of this. I am making no money from this, no profit, none of this. I'm simply sharing with you guys because I have come to realize that if we Bulgarians don't talk about Bulgarian, ultimately human history, it's very unlikely that the rest of the world will. Our own Bulgarian counterparts don't know much about this, and the lies and deception have been humongous. So for as long as this is possible to do, I will continue to share with you, translating and putting it out here for you guys to use your brains, use your heads, and think through, do your own research. If you know Bulgarian, awesome, go ahead and read that in depth. If you don't know Bulgarian language, I'm sure that you can use Google Translate and other modalities nowadays. Maybe you can even learn Bulgarian language. And hey, in the follow-up part 5 of episode 19, we're going to talk about literacy and Bulgarians' influence over the American continents. So stay tuned. If you're not interested, that's okay. I respect you as you are. That's fine. If you're interested, feel free to subscribe. And as always, thank you for your time and support. I hope you have a great rest of the day. Bye-bye.